To all the drivers out there delivering holiday cheer across our great country, season's greetings and a huge thank you from the Allen Lund Company.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Reddick.
A longtime columnist for Landline magazine is putting down his pen for good. We sit down with Managing Editor Jami Jones to talk about Dave Sweetman and the many articles of his time on the road that drew in readers. When most people get into trucking, they likely expect driving to be the biggest part of the job. But for those who start their own trucking businesses, paperwork becomes a very big part of their lives as well, including keeping basic records. I'll talk with Shasta May of MBA Tax and Bookkeeping Service. And finally, the holidays often come with a lull on the spot market, which often means better rates for those who continue to work. Is that trend holding true this year? Robert Rouse of DAT tells us and highlights a region of the country where owner-operators can make a little extra dough these days. But first, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. Our top story today. The average price for a gallon of diesel went up for the first time in 2 months last week. The Energy Information Administration says the average jumped 2 cents to $3.91 a gallon. But as is always the case, that depends on the region you're filling up in. Prices actually dipped in 6 of the 10 regions EIA tracks. The biggest spike was recorded in the lower Atlantic, where the average was up more than 8.5 cents. The biggest drop in California, where prices were down nearly 3 cents to $5.20 a gallon, although even then still the only region with prices north of $5. Will the upward trend continue into the new year? We'll have to wait and see, of course, but if the EIA numbers track with the latest data from ProMiles.com, prices could be ready to drop again. ProMiles had the Wednesday morning average at $3.92 a gallon, down 2 cents compared to the same day a week ago. Prices were down in 7 regions and up in 3. The U.S. DOT's Office of Inspector General has announced plans to evaluate implementation of the National Roadway Safety Strategy and monitor the program's success through an audit. The DOT unveiled its National Roadway Safety Strategy in early 2022 as a way of reducing traffic deaths. So far, most efforts have focused on lowering speeds, mostly on trucking, rather than the general driving population. Take, for instance, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration speed limiter proposal. To justify that proposal, FMCSA cited 2019 statistics indicating that there were nearly 900 fatal crashes involving large trucks in posted speed limits of 70 miles an hour or more. However, the agency told Landline that it did not know the traveling speeds of the large trucks involved in those crashes, nor did it know whether reducing the speed would have prevented deaths. FMCSA also was not able to provide information on whether the trucks involved in the crashes were already using a speed limiter. And it's also worth noting that the largest number of deadly crashes involving large trucks did not occur at the highest speeds. In 2019, there were close to 1,500 large truck-related fatal crashes in areas with 50 and 55 mile-per-hour speed limits. There was no data to show that lowering a truck's top speed to, say, 65 miles an hour or even 68 miles an hour would do anything to prevent those crashes. That's what opponents point out, including Representative Eric Burleson of Missouri, who made this point during a recent hearing in the House.
When I talk to truckers back home, they already feel that the federal government imposes strict regulations on them. This includes the hours of service regulations that limit how far they can drive. They are faced with long days that usually end with an hour searching for a parking spot, which is exhausting to them. And now you're telling them that they'll have to reach their destinations at a slower pace. With the hours of service regulation already imposed, is it smart to mandate the installation of trucks speed limiters when truckers are already heavily regulated? In their mind, when is enough enough? Many are afraid that if these mandates are implemented, then truckers will not only be subject to hours of service, but will be forced to get to their destination slower. And they feel like the need to make up. So here's my question. Many of these truckers may end up in a situation where they have to make up time, and because they have a speed limiter, the only place for them to make up time is probably on city streets, suburbs. They'll have to make up time probably going through construction zones.
Despite the concerns, FMCSA is expected to issue a notice of proposed rulemaking requiring speed limiters in the coming days or coming weeks. The agency is also expected to announce a proposed top speed at that time. The cost for violating FMCSA regulations will increase in 2024. In a final rule that is scheduled to be published in the Federal Register this week, the agency announced its new civil penalty amounts, which are changed annually to account for inflation. In the case of 2024, previous fine amounts are up, but only slightly. The new amounts apply only to violations that take place after the rule becomes effective. The rule does not change previously assessed or enforced penalties that the USDOT is actively collecting or has collected. We have a link to the full list of fine amounts at landline.media. Meanwhile, the cost of doing business at the DMV in Oregon will go up next week. Starting January 1st, a number of services will come with increased fees. That includes services associated with commercial driver's licenses. For example, the cost of a first-time issuance of a CDL is more than doubling from $75 to $160. Renewing your CDL will send you back $104, up more than $40 from the current price. And the commercial driver's skills test is also doubling at the start of the year, with the new price being $145. The changes are in accordance with new legislation in Oregon that's meant to help the DMV recover costs and avoid service reductions. California regulators are giving truck owners a little more time to comply with a new emission control program. The deadline to register in the Clean Truck Check database had been December 31st, but the California Air Resources Board just extended it to January 31st. You might know the Clean Truck Check program by its previous name, the Heavy Duty Inspection and Maintenance Program. It covers almost every heavy vehicle in the state that doesn't run on gas and is meant to ensure they're maintained and repaired quickly when needed. California is currently in Phase 2 of the program's implementation. The first went into effect a year ago with the deployment of devices that monitor the exhaust emissions of trucks. We are now in the second phase, which took effect in October. It calls for the owners of heavy trucks to register with the Clean Truck Check database and pay an annual compliance fee of $30 per vehicle before the new deadline of January 31st. Phase 3 takes effect in July with a requirement that the owners of heavy-duty vehicles conduct periodic emissions testing. Troopers across Louisiana and Mississippi are spending the holiday week conducting a traffic enforcement campaign. Commercial trucks are the focus, but maybe not in the way you think. The campaign centers around other drivers driving aggressively or dangerously around large trucks. Louisiana State Police and the Mississippi Highway Patrol Motor Carrier Division created a video for social media outlining what troopers will be looking out for.
We exit all vehicles when driving around commercial motor vehicles.
Avoid blind spots.
Be aware of long stopping distances.
Anticipate wide turns.
Stay a safe distance back when being stopped.
Merge and pass safely.
Be patient with commercial motor vehicles that are accelerating.
Never drive under the influence.
And stay focused on the road.
Be safe.
And have a happy holiday.
The campaign continues this week and into next. And finally, proof that sometimes procrastination does in fact pay off. UPI reports on a Maryland woman who was having car trouble but kept putting off a trip to the auto shop. When she finally did, she got a repair claim form with 5 digits and decided on a whim to use those same numbers on a Pick 5 lottery ticket. It won, and the woman is now $50,000 richer. Her car still hasn't been fixed, though. She says she might just buy a new one instead. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Scott. Do you have a news tip? Maybe you have a comment about something you heard on the air. Email us at landlinenow@ooida.com. Next, Ashley Blackford talks with Landline Magazine's Jami Jones about Dave Sweetman. I'll discuss record keeping with Shasta May of MBA Tax and Bookkeeping, and Scott Thompson discusses rates with Robert Rouse of DAT. We'll be back in just a moment with more of the program. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Control your toll costs and eliminate tolling headaches with Prepass Tolls. Prepass Tolls means toll volume discounts. Just one invoice for all tolls and fewer violations. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
Attention all truckers, Dean Michael, the tax doctor here. I want to talk to you about those dreaded tax problems. I know you want to keep on trucking and not even think about them, but let's face it, they're not going away all on their own. You need professional help. I've been helping truckers put their tax problems in the rearview mirror for years. I can help you too. Call me now for a free consultation at 888-557-4020 or go to mytaxhelpmd.com. It's like I always say, keep your eyes on the road, I'll keep mine on the IRS. 888-557-4020.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Landline Now, welcome back. Jami Jones joins me now. She is managing editor for Landline Magazine. Jami, thank you for coming in.
Hey, you're welcome, Ashley.
We are taking a look at the December-January issue of the magazine, and I'm sure many of our readers were disappointed to read Dave Sweetman's column. Talk to me about that and what he announced.
Yes, Diesel Dave Sweetman is retiring, and he's had this tremendous career, and you just want it to keep going, you know, and he's been a longtime columnist in the industry. And I remember when he first came to Landline, trucking journalists are kind of a tight-knit group. You know, overall, there's not a lot of competition.
I've noticed that being with you at Matt's, like, you knew everyone.
You know, well, and that's the way it was, because when I first walked into Matt's, Sandy Sonker, Paul Abelson, and Dave Sweetman were sitting there, and they're like, hey, come on over here, because they could see the deer in the headlights. Like, what?
Where do I go?
Yeah, what's going on here?
What am I doing? Yeah.
So the trucking journalists always have looked out for each other, and Dave was actually working for another publication when we first met, and you know, mergers and acquisitions in media is just like anywhere else. You know, some people make the cut, some don't. And they stupidly cut Dave Sweetman when there was an acquisition of the publication that he was working at. And the second I heard, I levitated into Sandy Sonker's office. She was the managing editor at the time. And I might as well have been talking to my mom, asking her if I could bring the puppy home. I mean, I was begging for her to let me extend an offer to Sweetman to get him in the pages of Landline. And I will honestly say that's probably the least I ever had to twist her arm to get my way on something, but it was so much fun to, you know, call Dave and have that conversation. I think I even said something jokingly like, come over to the dark side, the candy's good over here, or something. I don't know, just something really stupid. But he wrote his first column for us in February of 2008.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, he's been around for quite a while. And it was funny because, like I said, we know each other professionally, and when you spend time at these truck shows, you feel like you really get to know them, but once you're actually editing somebody and doing this on a regular basis, your friendship grows so much more. And, you know, Dave lived life on the pages of Landline. And it was everything from, you know, his stories of trucking where, you know, he stopped and helped a older woman and a young lady with a baby whose car had stalled out on the side of the road. And when the cop pulls up, he's like, did the truck hit you? And it's like, yeah, I mean, and it's stories that truckers can relate to, you know, where, you know, he was immediately considered the villain in this scenario. And then, of course, he had one of the coolest gigs on the planet where he hauled these high-end cars to the people like Jay Leno and Paul Newman. He just amazing things that he got to do. But I think what made him so special is he really did live his life on the pages, because in January of 2009, his wife, Laurie, unexpectedly died.
Wow.
And it was really a very traumatic thing. And, you know, we wondered, you always kind of wonder if that's something that people are going to want to share or if they're going to keep that to themselves. And it was probably one of the most moving columns I've ever read from a writer, and it ran in our March 2009 issue, and the headline was "The Call You Never Want to Get."
Oh, wow.
And he just told the story and why you should stay in touch with your loved ones. And he had something to say, and damn it, we were going to listen.
Yeah.
And he was always so authentic in that way. And I think that's what made that column so special to so many readers, because it was, the magazine's for truck drivers, but they're not just truck drivers. It's people too. And Dave brought that human aspect out better than anybody else. And it's going to be really hard to go on without him. I've talked to him several times since he turned in the column. And he's still DS with the BS, so anybody who has his email or, is friends with him on Facebook, it's just, it was time. He felt it was time to go on. And, I'm a big proponent of, when people are ready to retire, because there's more life out there. And, life is not always just a JOB. And if it starts turning into a JOB, then you've got problems.
Yeah.
So I'm always really supportive, but I never let him get too far away because I know, I know his phone number.
Yes.
So we do have that.
One thing he mentioned in this column was how sought after he was, because you weren't the only person who knew, this guy is gold.
No, it was the candy. I'm telling you, it was tempting him with the candy. No, I don't remember. I just kept calling him, saying this funny stuff. And Suzanne Stempinski was our field editor at that point. They were really good friends. So, and then Sandy just had this really quirky, unique way of approaching things. And they kind of shared the love because Sweetman actually went to Woodstock. Sandy wanted to, but that didn't work out for her. But yeah, and so he actually wrote a column one time about going to Woodstock, and Sandy was like, "Oh my gosh," and so she just loved it. And we had, so there was a lot going on there, but I felt like we had the inside track just because we had some deeper connections than maybe some of the others did.
How enjoyable has it been for you? I mean, you read a lot of copy that comes in, and it's all well written. Some of it's not as exciting as others. But getting his columns, and once you start reading, you're hooked. He takes you on an adventure through the stories. What has that been like for you? When you see that he has a column in to be read.
Oh, well, it's always exciting. It just what's he going to do this time? Because he always would find unique things. One time he wrote about a tree. And it was one of the most moving, it hit you in the feels. And it was about a tree, that was hundreds of years old and all these generations of his family. And I'm like, and then truckers started writing in because they had driven by that tree and they saw that it fell over.
Wow.
And I'm like, it was about a tree, so it was kind of interesting. What's fun from an editor perspective, and Dave and I had a few of these over the years, all writers go through it. They're just, you hit writer's block. What on earth am I going to write about? And I remember one time he was just locked up. And he's, sometimes we would run a best of to give him some time, or whatever. But I remember being on the phone, and usually I could get him shook loose and get him out of his own head and just get him into storytelling mode. And he had just picked up a new truck. And he was going along and he's telling me about his truck and all this. And he said, and I pulled out of the dealership and I'm, shifting through the gears, and I hit top gear and I realized I'm going 60 miles an hour. They had activated the speed limiter on his truck. And about that time, an unnamed company truck, slightly speed limited, faster than his, just passed him. And he was furious. He said, I hit the next exit, went straight back to the dealership. Yep. It was like, turn this thing off, And it was hilarious, and I'm not even doing this the story justice because he's such a gifted storyteller. But he did that, and he had me rolling. And I said, there's your column right there.
Yep.
And he didn't even write about that when he had another story that was funnier. And I was like, you don't have anything to write about.
Yeah. Wow.
So it was just it's always a lot of fun. But we do wish him absolute 100% happiness in his retirement, professionally. His friends here at Landline are never going to let him get too far away because we know his phone number. So
yes.
We are fortunate in that regard.
Now on to another topic of the magazine, editor's desk, and one of the articles on the New Year's resolutions. We had some tips in this issue and some advice for the federal government. Are we hoping they take it?
You would hope. I mean, we had a hearing a couple of weeks ago that makes me think that maybe they won't, because I talked about a short story in my editor's page, The Possibility of Evil, and it was actually written by the same woman who wrote the Lottery, if you remember that, where the townspeople actually stoned an individual. I mean, they're both really dark stories. They're short stories. And the main character in The Possibility of Evil is Mrs. Strangeworth, and she just frames this false narrative in her head and acts according to it. And I feel like that's what we've got regulators doing right now with the automatic emergency braking mandate, the automated driving systems, speed limiters. You know, they're not letting reality get in the way of this false narrative that they've got going on in their heads, and they're acting in accordance to that. And so Mark Schirmer and I, when he was, we were talking about what we were going to do for the cover story, he was playing around with an idea of resolutions. And I said, maybe we need to suggest resolutions for, lawmakers and regulators. And he was off to the races with it. It was really good. And it's such basic concepts that if you ever felt like the agency or lawmakers would actually embrace these things, it would actually lead to a better life for truck drivers. And that's what resolutions are supposed to all be about, is to increase happiness, productivity, all that. So if you're into that thing, so we're hoping some lawmakers and regulators might actually read the magazine. I know Representative Nels gave us a big shout out at that same hearing I'm talking about, and told people they needed to read Landline. Yes. So hopefully a few more will pick this one up in particular, because I do, when you talk about things like valuing a truck driver's time and leveling the playing field for the small business truckers, for truck drivers, period, and actually prioritizing their safety instead of this perception that they're the unsafe on the road. And, and just really treat it as a profession and a lifestyle, trucking overall. And it's, like I said, they're such basic concepts, but when you dig into it and see how these different proposals and things going on are just running counter to all this, hopefully they'll start to figure out that they're living in this false narrative, and we've got to get them shook out of it.
Now, one thing you mentioned is that 2024, of course, it's an election year, and that means lawmakers are more apt and open to conversations. How beneficial can that be, for drivers, for OOIDA members to talk to their lawmakers, to give their opinion on some of these things? I
mean, the reality is they're trying to keep their job, and they work for their constituents. So there's going to be more events that they're going to be attending. There's going to be more phone calls answered, more emails read. And to just put a really fine point on it, especially with the speed limiter legislation out there that would prohibit the agency from moving forward on a speed limiter mandate, this is the time to convince your lawmakers to sign on as co-sponsors. They don't have to be on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. They could be on any committee. It doesn't matter. Or the Senate. We just need them to sign on. So if we can get that congressional roadblock thrown up on speed limiters, that will basically be the end of that conversation, because it's really hard to unring legislation once it's passed into law. So, those opportunities are going to be plentiful next year in 2024, and you really have to jump on it. As soon as they get back from those holiday recesses, start blowing up their phones, shooting the emails, visit Fighting for Truckers. That's how you can advocate for yourself.
All right, Jami, thank you very much.
Hey, you're welcome, Ashley.
That was Landline Magazine's Jami Jones. You can check out landline.media for all the latest from the trucking industry. And if you have a news tip, you can contact us through the website or call 816-229-5791. For Landline Now, I'm Ashley Blackford. We'll be back after this.
Today's rising costs affect everyone. Replace your harmonic damper with a genuine Vibertech TVD viscous damper to prevent costly repairs and downtime. Keep your money in your pocket and your truck on the road with Vibertech TVD. Recommended replacement at 500,000 miles or 15,000 hours.
Ready to make more money? Use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off Truckstop Load Board Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2023 when you purchase Load Board Pro.
When most people get into trucking, they likely expect driving to be the biggest part of the job. But for those who start their own trucking businesses, paperwork becomes a very big part of their lives as well. You're listening to Landline Now, and I'm your host, Mark Reddig. Welcome back to the program. A big part of the paperwork that any owner-operator has to deal with relates to taxes, specifically the federal and state income taxes due on April 15th every year. A great deal of that involves bookkeeping, but in addition to that, record keeping is vitally important to anyone filing federal income tax. You might think those are the same thing, but they're not. And to clear it all up, I talked with Shasta May of MBA Tax and Bookkeeping Service. Let's talk about record keeping. And the first thing I think that we have to do, Shasta, is I think a lot of people hear that and they think we're talking about bookkeeping. What do we mean by record keeping, and how does it differ from bookkeeping?
Record keeping is how you log, store, and dispose of important financial information for your business. Records are your source documents, both physical and electronic, that show your business transactions and the dates of those transactions, the amounts of those transactions. That would include contracts for whether those are loans, equipment transactions, any legal documents. These are all your business details, and these records, these are crucial records.
When we talk about these records, give us a few examples, if you would.
Well, when we're talking about records, what should my record keeping include? Like I said, copies of all business transactions. And the transactions are reflected on multiple areas. They're reflected on your settlements, your bank statements, your credit card statements, your receipts, invoices, sales slips, contracts for equipment transactions. I mean, anytime you buy, sell, or trade, you've got to hold on to the paperwork that reflects date, amount, transaction. And then any business loans, whether that's an SBA loan, whether that's a loan for capital for the business. These are all the records that I'm talking about when I'm talking about record keeping. And a lot of times people don't realize lost records are lost deductions as well. And lost deductions are lost money. So it's very important for the business to have all these documents.
What are ways that you can organize these records? I mean, it's one thing to keep them, but we always have talked about the shoebox full of receipts that some people show up to their tax preparer with. And obviously that's not an ideal situation. So talk, if you would, about different ways that people can organize these records so that they can access them later on when they do need them.
Well, you need to have some type of document management system in place. And there's two main ways to keep these business records. And they are manual record keeping and computerized, automated record keeping. So manually, when we say manually, we're talking about the shoebox, the accordion folder, the 3-ring binder. It doesn't matter what it is as long as it's something that you can keep hold of these records. You can always record them and put them in a computer system or a record keeping system down the line. But the most important thing is to keep them and figure out a system that works for you, where you keep a hold of these records. It also is digitally, where you can save documents, that are emailed to you, whether this is your settlements, your bank statements. You're saving these documents to files, whether you're scanning in receipts and other important paperwork that that you're going to need to have. You need to spend the time setting up some kind of system that you can stick to. And most important is to set aside a regular time, whether that's every week or every month, to deal with this kind of administrative, boring, tedious thing that just has to be done.
Okay. How long should you keep these records? I mean, I know that you need to keep them, obviously, until you're filing taxes based on them. But I know also that some people like to keep those records for a bit longer. Give us an idea of how long you should keep them and why you need to keep them that long.
The very minimum with things reflected on your tax return is 3 years from the date filed. I really prefer to err on the side of caution and would want you to keep those records a bit longer. I think 5 years is a reasonable time that those should be kept. Any contracts, legal documents, I would keep longer. Any contracts on any assets that you have, your equipment, you want to keep those for the length of the equipment and even for a little bit after that equipment is sold, traded, whatever, I would still hang on to those records. The IRS can audit a tax return going back 3 years, but if for some reason they feel that there is some type of fraud, they can go back, as far as they want. So you just always want to err on the side of caution and keep those records for an additional year or two at least, but minimum 3 on tax records and things reflected on your tax return. And with equipment, assets for the length that you have that asset plus 1 year is my recommendation. And you really want to store these things safely as well. That's important too.
Well, what do you mean by that?
Well, I think safety, you want to have safety when you're storing these records. Even if you choose to keep all your records electronically, it's so vital that you keep like a regular electronic backup. I would recommend having a paper copy as well elsewhere if possible. There's nothing that makes me happier than when someone has an audit and they have everything that we need, because the IRS is like the house in Vegas. They're always the winner. The odds are always with them, not with you. And so many times, a poor taxpayer, this poor guy, he's lost his records. It's a challenge for me to find something from 3 years ago, and I'm really good at this. And I lose things. And so for someone who that is not their focus of their entire world, it's hard for me, and that's my focus, and I still lose things. So you've really got to treat these records like they're gold, because they're so important and can save you so much money. Because if the IRS audits you and let's say every single deduction on your return is legitimate, but you don't have the backup, the document, the substantiation, they can say none of it's real and that you made it all up because you've lost your records. And that would be the most heartbreaking, awful thing to see happen to somebody. So it's so important you keep the documentation.
And of course, in a case like that, you're then going to owe tax almost on your gross.
Yes. And don't forget the penalties they'll assess, on that money going back from the day you owed it. And they always wait till it's been at least, 2.5, 3 years when they start looking at you. So you really want to protect yourself. Make security a priority. Those records, they're your business. They're your life. They're your income. They're everything that you've devoted your life to year after year. So treat them like they're a separate person and take really good care of them and make sure they're always safe and accounted for.
Now, we've talked a lot about the business side of this and all the different records like equipment information, canceled checks, bank and credit card statements, and so on, and receipts and so on. But that's all on the business side. And a lot of these folks that we're talking about are sole proprietors. They basically are the business. Is there personal stuff that they should be keeping among those records?
Yes. When you're filing a tax return, when you're a sole proprietor, your business income and expenses are reported as part of your personal return. When you're involved in, say, a partnership or multi-member LLC or corporation, then you're filing a separate return for the business, and then that income is reported on your personal return. So on the personal side, these records are just as important. And those records typically are going to include if you're receiving a mortgage interest statement, property taxes, If you've given charitable contributions, you want to keep those records. If you have children and you pay for childcare, you want those childcare records, all the things that are going to be deducted on that tax return. And again, this is substantiation for what's on a return. And they don't necessarily, once they're looking at a return, they're not necessarily going to stick to just the business side of it. They may start looking at everything. So you want to make sure that you've got that backup, those records for every single thing on that tax return.
Shasta, where do people typically fall short in this area? What are the typical problems people run into with record keeping?
I think there's a lot of different things. I think a lot of times when there are purchases, whether that is a home purchase or an equipment purchase, a lot of times the contracts, sales agreements, whatever those are not necessarily kept. They're somewhere, but it's finding them. And we don't want you to have to panic and come in off the road because you can't remember where you put that purchase agreement or where that bill of sale is from that old that old trailer you sold. We've got to have these records. Any transaction is important, is a business transaction when you're self-employed. A lot of things that people forget to do is a lot of us take the vehicle miles, the business miles we put on our personal vehicle. So when you're off the road and you're home, but you're still having to do a lot of running around, whether that's to do banking, picking up truck parts, whatever that is, you're allowed to take a deduction for all those miles you're putting on your personal vehicle. And to be able to do that, we have to have you take an odometer reading every year so that we know, number one, how many miles you put on that vehicle for the year. And then also you need to be keeping track of all the business miles you put on the vehicle. So I need to report, for the year you put 9,600 miles, and of those 9,600, 2,003 were business miles, but you need to keep a little notebook or some kind of little diary in the glove box saying, okay, this date I went to the bank, it was this many miles, this date I went to pick up truck parts, etc. So that's an important thing that a lot of people miss out on. I think is one of the top things. A lot of people out there have SBA loans and they have to scramble to try to figure out what the interest was, say, on that SBA loan. That was a business loan that was used for the business. We need to know that interest, what that was, and we can get a write-off. As well as with any equipment loans, you pay a lot of interest on those equipment loans. So every year we can take that interest as a separate deduction from the depreciation that we're taking on that equipment.
Well, Shasta, is there anything else on this topic that you want to include or that I didn't ask about? I should have.
No, I think I just wanted to get out there that record keeping is so important. And believe me, I know better than anyone how tedious it is. And it's the last thing you want to do when you have a little bit of downtime, but it is so worth it. You are taking care of your business in the details. You really are. It's like your baby. So you want to take as good a care of it as possible.
Okay, Shasta, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
I've been talking with Shasta May of MBA Tax and Bookkeeping Service about record keeping. If you have questions about this or other tax matters, you can contact Shasta May by calling 1-888-407-1669, by email at smay@mbataxhelp.com, or by going to the company's website at mbataxhelp.com. Again, that phone number is 1-888-407-1669. The email address is smay@mbataxhelp.com, or you can go to the company's website at mbataxhelp.com. We'll have all that information on our website, landlinenow.com. Just click on the photo or headline in the red box, and you'll find all the email addresses, website links, and phone numbers we mention on the show, plus links to related articles. Again, that's at our website, landlinenow.com. We'll be back in just a moment with more. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Welcome back to Landline Now. The last couple weeks of the year usually mean a mixed bag on the spot market. With more people sitting, rates usually go up. Let's see if that pattern is holding true with the help of Robert Rouse. Robert is a senior product manager for DAT Freight and Analytics, and he joins us on the line now. Robert, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Scott.
Thanks for being here. So I kind of laid out what we normally see on the spot market this time of year. I guess I'll start by asking you, is that how things are playing out right now?
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly how we're seeing it the last couple weeks of the year. Last week, we saw the number of loads decrease again by around 3.4%, down to about 797,000 loads. This is exactly what we expect as we entering the last week of the year. We expect this trend to continue this week as well, as it's bookended by two major holidays. So expect another slow week as well. But the number of trucks on the load board also decreased, but by a much more percentage than we saw for the loads. They decreased by about 16%, down to 311,000 trucks. Normally with a lower load volume, you might see an increase in trucks, but we definitely saw a decrease, which hopefully means a lot of drivers are able to get home to their families over the holiday time period. When we look at the overall strength of the spot market last week, we saw load to truck ratios increase actually for all three equipment types. This is mostly driven by the fact that we saw a larger week over week decrease in the truck availability than the load volumes. When we look at reefer load to truck ratio specifically, load post volume increased by over 13%. To 169,000 loads, while carrier equipment posts dropped back down to the second lowest amount in the last 7 years. And that led last week's reefer load to truck ratio to increase by 43% week over week to 2.72. And then lastly, with rates, last week we saw national benchmark broker to carrier spot rates without fuel increase for all three equipment types. Both dry vans and reefers increased by about 4 cents per mile, while flatbeds saw the largest increase at about 7 cents per mile. This is typically what we see happen over the last 2 weeks of the year. As there are less trucks available, we see the rates increase. The good news for carriers is diesel prices have continued to stay below $4 a gallon. Plus, the EIA adjusted their diesel forecast down slightly for 2024. Diesel prices are now projected to average $3.99 per gallon in Q1 of 2024, which means really good market for the carriers out there.
All right, yeah, so some nominal gains there with regard to rates that we're seeing, which, as we said, is kind of expected this time of year. We're also always looking for markets or areas of the country that may be producing good loads and good rates. Are there any that stand out to you right now?
Yeah, one that comes to mind is the Phoenix, Arizona market. The trucking industry in and near Phoenix is really strong, as well as the overall Arizona market as well. A key reason for the market's growth is the Interstate 10. It's a relatively flat, straight, direct route straight through to the Los Angeles area. I-10 provides an easy connection to the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. As rates for warehouse space continued to climb in the greater Los Angeles area, there have been moves by many shippers to move goods to warehouses and distribution centers in and around Phoenix. The I-10 corridor makes it easier to ship goods to and from the area compared to the greater Los Angeles area. Phoenix land and warehousing space are much, much cheaper. In addition to other supply chains may also go through Arizona to reach key in the rest of the West Coast and even Mexico, with interstate highways as I-8, I-10, I-17, I-19, and I-40. They all play pivotal roles in Arizona's trucking industry. Phoenix was also a top 10 overall transaction activity market in the logistics space. It has 13 million square feet of transactions in this category and about 8.3 million square feet of big box space under construction. So there's a lot of new construction for warehousing. An October 2022 online article by Transport Topic also noted that Arizona Department of Transportation officials had identified needs for more truck parking spaces and passing climbing lanes on the key roadways as shipments grow. So according to the ADOT, nearly 285 million tons of freight valued at $395 billion were carried by truck somewhere in the state in 2019, and 42% of the freight was local, 38% was just coming through, 12% was inbound freight, and 8% was outbound freight. Trade with Canada and Mexico accounted for about 28 million tons, or 9.5% of the total freight, with a majority of the cross-border flows to and from Mexico, amounting to 22.5 million tons, and that's all mostly carried by trucks. The truck freight shipped through Arizona starts primarily in California, Texas, or Mexico, and the top commodity categories are plastic products, pharmaceuticals, fresh fish, and construction materials. The state inbound goods from California include consumer goods and vehicles coming from Asia and handled through California's ports before being carried by trucks into Arizona.
Yeah, some food for thought there, and some positive developments, I think, as well, that we're seeing down there in the Southwest, for sure. Something to keep an eye on as we move into 2024 here. It's no secret we're always looking for good news as well, because it's no secret that 2023 was not kind, or has not been kind for the most part, to owner-operators who depend on the spot market to make a living. As we close out this year, Robert, and look ahead to a new one, what advice would you have for folks out there waiting for the market to turn?
Yeah, 2024 is hopefully going to be a year where we're going to see that market turn. And one of the biggest things that carriers can do is really figuring out how they can make the most out of their load boards and out of making sure that their trucks are visible. One of the things that we always talk about is you have more negotiating power when you're receiving a phone call from a broker that really needs your service, versus you calling and dialing for dollars while calling on loads. So how do you get brokers to call you? And that's the biggest thing that I think drivers should do in 2024 is post your truck. A lot of carriers don't want to post their trucks. They worry that they'll get bombarded with too many phone calls. However, posting your truck with as much detail as possible really helps that broker make a call knowing that you're a likely match to a load that they need to get moved. When they're calling you, that means there's some urgent pressure. So what goes into an effective truck post? The biggest thing is adding the right equipment type. For instance, if we're talking about produce season, which is going to be coming up in a couple of months, when the demand for increases for reefer equipment, be specific about your equipment specs and capabilities. If you're a flatbed carrier and have a specialized trailer or tarps and chains, or experience hauling a particular commodity, or under really demanding road conditions, put all of that into the description of your truck. This is really going to set you apart from other trucks that they are searching for on the market. Also, include your desired destination when you post your truck. A lot of truckers will leave this destination field blank because they don't want to limit themselves and will really go anywhere for the right amount of money. That while that could be true, it also could open doors to receiving calls from brokers about problem loads or going to destinations you really don't want to go. The ones that are hard to cover because the rate is too low, or going to a market that no one wants to go to, or both. And who wants to get calls for brokers' problem loads? You want to get the calls that actually match exactly what you want to do. Lastly, you want to let brokers know what rate you want to make. When you post a rate, it's a starting point in the negotiation process. It lets the broker know that you're both in the same ballpark. Once they provide the lane information, you can always adjust your rate accordingly based on demand. A lot of drivers I've talked to said that this has really been helpful for them as they're getting those phone calls, and the broker knows, hey, my minimum is $2.50 per mile, and then they can negotiate up or down based off of that specific lane.
Yeah, great advice. Every little bit helps, especially these days, as we've kind of pointed out over the past several months. Robert, always a pleasure. Before we let you go, real quick, where can people go for more information courtesy of DAT?
Yeah, absolutely. You can always get the latest rate information at dat.com/trendlines, or look for the weekly market updates on the DAT blog. They're published every Wednesday. Lastly, check out and subscribe to the DAT IQ channel on YouTube, where analytics and forecasting teams take a deep dive into the freight markets each week.
Robert, thanks so much. We appreciate your time.
Thanks, Scott.
And that's our show for today. We thank you for listening. We'll see you right back here with another show tomorrow. Until next time, take care and drive safe.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife.
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
chrome,
and I am
a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us! Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.